Today we are talking about some serious geological titans. We're going to dive into three colossal volcanic eruptions, all from the same fiery neighborhood in Indonesia that didn't just rattle an archipelago. No, they shook the entire planet, changing climates, cultures, and maybe even the course of human history itself. But let's start with a question to get things going. What do you think is the absolute loudest sound ever recorded? I'll give you a hint. It's not a bomb, not a rocket launch. It was a roar from the Earth itself, with a power that's pretty hard to imagine. And yeah, we're going to find out exactly what it was today. So to really get a grip on these events, you have to start right here, the Pacific Ring of Fire. It's this nearly 40,000-kilometer-long horseshoe of intense seismic and volcanic activity. And sitting right in the middle of it all is Indonesia, which is, you could argue, its most powerful and volatile section. It's a true forge of the world, and it's the geological pressure cooker that cooked up our three giants. So here's our game plan. We're going to journey way back in time to a super eruption that might have pushed our species right to the edge. Then we'll leap forward to an event that literally stole a summer from the entire world, and we're going to wrap it up with that island that made the history-making sound I was just talking about. Okay, first stop, about 74,000 years ago. We're talking about the Toba super eruption. Now, this was not just another volcano blowing its top. This was a planet-altering event on a scale that is, frankly, almost impossible to wrap your head around. So volcanologists have this scale, right? The Volcanic Explosivity Index, the VEI. It goes from 0 to 8. Well, Toba was an 8, a mega-colossal event. That's the highest possible rating, a rating reserved for eruptions that are almost mythical in their power. And the sheer amount of stuff it threw out is just staggering. Toba ejected at least 2,800 cubic kilometers of magma and ash. That's enough material to cover the entire Indian subcontinent in a thick, choking blanket. And this is what really puts it into perspective. The other two giants we're going to talk about, Tambora and Krakatoa, they were cataclysmic in their own right. But if you take all the material they ejected and add it together, it's still just a tiny fraction of what Toba unleashed. Toba was playing in a completely different league. For a long time, the leading idea was something called the Toba catastrophe theory. The theory goes like this. The eruption was so massive, it kicked off a volcanic winter that lasted for years, plunging the Earth into a deep freeze. This created a huge population bottleneck that squeezed humanity down to maybe just a few thousand people, almost wiping us out completely. But the story's gotten a bit more complicated and a lot more interesting. Newer archaeological finds in places like India and Africa show that while the eruption was definitely devastating, early humans were incredibly resilient. They survived, they adapted their hunting and fishing strategies, and they kept going. Toba didn't end our story. It just became this incredible testament to our species' ability to endure the absolute worst. All right, let's jump way forward in time. We're now in 1815, looking at Mount Tambora. Now, this is the most powerful volcanic eruption in recorded history, and its consequences were felt almost instantly all across the globe. So Tambora clocked in as a VI 7, still monstrously huge, about 10 times more powerful than Krakatoa. It blasted around 100 cubic kilometers of rock and dust, high up into the stratosphere. This material created a kind of veil that blocked sunlight, and as a result, average global temperatures dropped by over 0.5 degrees Celsius. The immediate human cost was just staggering. We're talking at least 71,000 people dead. But here's the really crucial part to understand. Most of them didn't die in the initial blast. They died from what came next, the starvation and the disease that were caused by this worldwide climate chaos. And the cold numbers really can't capture the horror of it all. This eyewitness account from a British official, well, it paints a truly grim picture of what it was like on the surrounding islands. He describes widespread famine, disease, and just empty, abandoned villages. So the next year, 1816, became known all across the Northern Hemisphere as the year without a summer. That atmospheric dust led to snow in June, massive crop failures, and famine spreading from North America all the way to Europe and Asia. The world was literally starving because a mountain had erupted on the other side of the planet. But here's where the story takes a wild turn. This global gloom had some really unexpected cultural consequences. All that dreary, cold weather in Europe forced a group of writers indoors during a trip to Switzerland. They decided to have a ghost story competition to pass the time. And the results? Well, Mary Shelley started writing Frankenstein,
And John Polidori wrote The Vampire, which basically kicked off the whole vampire genre. At the same time, it's thought that the environmental chaos in the Bay of Bengal caused a mutation in cholera, triggering a deadly pandemic. Crazy, right?
And that brings us to our last giant, Krakatoa. Now, by 1883, the world was way more connected with things like telegraph cables. This made the eruption one of the first truly global media events. Its story wasn't told over years, it was told in real time, over hours. The big show came on August 27th. A series of 4 massive explosions basically tore the island to pieces. At 5:30 a.m., you get the first blast, then another at 6:44 a.m. But it was the third explosion at 10:02 in the morning that would literally be heard around the world. And just a little while after that, the island itself just collapsed into the sea. I mean, it is just so hard to overstate the raw power of that sound wave. On a ship about 64 kilometers, or 40 miles away, the blast was so loud it actually ruptured the sailors' eardrums. Just try to imagine a sound with that kind of physical, destructive force. And there it is. That's the answer to our question from the beginning. The sound from that 10:02 a.m. blast was heard up to 4,800 kilometers away in places like Australia. The atmospheric pressure wave it created was so powerful that it was recorded on scientific instruments as it circled the entire planet 3.5 times. It is still, to this day, the loudest sound in recorded history. And while that sound was making history, the actual impacts were absolutely deadly. The official death toll was over 36,000 people. And as you can see here, the overwhelming cause of death wasn't the blast itself or the ash. It was the enormous tsunamis, some reaching up to 150 feet high, that were kicked up when the island collapsed into the ocean. And just like Tambora, Krakatoa shot a massive cloud of sulfur dioxide way up into the stratosphere. And this gas acted like a global filter for sunlight, scattering it in weird ways. It created these intensely vivid, spectacular, and honestly pretty eerie sunsets that were visible all around the world for years after. And this global light show had a direct impact on the art world. Artists like William Oscroft were totally mesmerized, and he made hundreds of sketches trying to capture these strange colors. But even more famously, art historians now widely believe that the terrifying blood-red sky in Edvard Munch's iconic painting The Scream wasn't just a product of his imagination. It was probably a realistic depiction of what those spooky Krakatoa sunsets looked like all the way from Norway. So after all that, what are the big takeaways from these 3 earth-shattering events? Well, each one of them left behind a totally unique and profound legacy, a story written in fire and ash that stretched across the entire globe. This final chart really just lays it all out, doesn't it? You got Toba, the prehistoric VEI-8 Titan, with that unimaginable volume and the power to change the course of our entire species. Then there's Tambora, the VEI-7, whose legacy was the global climate disaster of the year without a summer. And finally, Little Krakatoa, a VEI-6, which, even though it was the smallest of the 3, still managed to create the loudest sound in history and literally painted the world skies. You know, from near extinction to artistic inspiration, these 3 Indonesian volcanoes are a powerful reminder of the incredible power that is always simmering just beneath our feet. The last supereruption forced our ancient ancestors into a brutal choice: adapt or die. And it leaves us with a pretty critical question, doesn't it? As a global civilization today, are we truly prepared for when the Earth decides to roar like that again?